Hi, U.S. history. Listening to a little Rise Against this morning. The song is called Satellite. So on this Friday morning, kind of getting pepped up for things. It is week 6, quarantine week 6. We're going to jump into Schoology. Have the hiccups. Jump into Schoology here and go down to Friday, April 24th. I put in another example of a good meme. This one's using SpongeBob and the Warsaw Pact and the NATO Pact as an example. And thought I'd throw that one in there since this is our meme week of history memes. This one was given to me by Mr. Stone King, so I thought I would include that today. Today, we're going to talk about the difference between communism and capitalism, this tension that we've been talking about so much, and what the huge difference is between communism and capitalism. So we have a lecture today, and if you're familiar with what I've been doing with my lectures lately, you know that there are some code words that you're going to need to write into a document and report. So that is what we're doing today in terms of our lecture. So let's go ahead and get started. It's really not a long lecture. You do want to take notes on this. It's more of me giving some examples of the difference between communism and capitalism. So this is continuance of our notes of the Cold War. This is topic number 3 within those notes. And we're going to start talking about perspectives. And we're going to start first with the USSR perspective and why they're doing what they're doing, why they want to try something brand new like communism. Okay. So that's kind of where we're going with this. So let's go. So we need to understand that the USSR has had a long history. Russia, before it became the United Soviet Socialist Republic, it had a long history of constantly being invaded. If you go way back in history, we can see the invasion by the Mongols. We can see the invasions that were done, just the instability of that nation. So the USSR has always had this very strong distrust of foreigners because of this long history of violence, really. And with the United States having done the things prior in World War II that kind of created a distrust between the USSR and the the USSR sees the US as an outside power that is out of its bounds. They question the motives of the US. Does the US want to extend world power into the USSR or into their neighbors like Poland and East Germany? So it's this distrust of knowing what are the motives behind things, and also knowing that life that the US does in the way that they philosophically run their government and their economy is different than the communist idea. So that's a big thing. That's a big distrust. All right, let's go with code word number 1. Let's do our CIA thing here. So, third hour, your first code word is Spencer. SPENCER. Sixth hour, your first code word is Olivia. OLIVIA. 2 code words. Third hour, Spencer. Sixth hour, Olivia. All right, so let's continue. So the USSR believed that capitalism was a flawed system. They had tried capitalism up until 1917, until they had the Bolshevik Revolution. They were practicing capitalism. But what they found is that within their society, that it was a system for them that they felt rewarded greed. And it put class versus class, like the upper class versus the middle class versus the lower class. And so you get this class versus class, and only a small percentage of the population gets the greater percentage of money. We see that in our own society today, that we have people that have billions of dollars, while there are people that are barely making enough money to feed their families. That's kind of how capitalism works. And the Soviet Union said, this is not what we want. This is not how we want to run our government. And so they wanted to try something else. And so this idea of communism was just a theory. We studied that in class. We studied the theory of communism, and the USSR said, we're willing to give it a try. We're willing to not just read it on paper, but try to give it a practice. So let me show you what I mean by the difference between communism and capitalism. So I have here some names. So under capitalism, we have some workers. Let's say we have Rowan, Alma, Taya, and Daniel working, okay? And under capitalism, let's say Rowan is a manager of our industry, okay? Rowan, he makes $1,000 a week because he's a manager. He has a higher position, he has more responsibility, maybe works a few more hours, that type of thing. So he's going to make a little bit more. Alma, she is, let's say, kind of a sub-manager. She has a few more responsibilities than Taya and Daniel, so she makes $600 a week. Taya and Daniel are workers, and they make $400 a week, okay? Under capitalism, this can happen. You can see the different classings that could possibly happen with Rowan making more than, let's say, Taya, all right? And under capitalism, you can do whatever you want with your money, okay? So Rowan, he may be satisfied. He may be happy. He's a manager. He's going to retire from this. This is what he's going to do for his job for the rest of his life. Whereas Taya, she may be saving her money and hoping one day that she can start her own business. Alma, she may be trying to get Rowan's job eventually one day when Rowan retires. Okay, Daniel, he may be happy with what he's doing. Maybe he has a wife that is working as a pharmacist and making lots of money. So he's like, my $400 a week is good. Okay, so under capitalism, we earn money at different levels and we do whatever we want with that money. Communism is different. Again, as it says right here, treating all workers the same. Okay, so under communism, everything is owned by the government. Let's get that straight. So a lot of times I'll hear people say something like, oh, the United States wants to become a communist country. No, not at all. I don't think I've ever heard a politician say that. Now, are there communist programs that have been proposed? Yes. But for us to become a communist country, guys, everything would have to be owned by the government. Everything. Every pharmacy, every Costco, every single Ace Hardware, everything would be owned by the government. And the government decides how much is produced and how much is sold and for how much and how much people make. And the idea is that everybody makes an equal amount. So let's talk about this. So I'm going to use this paper as an example. Let's say this paper represents how much is made at a factory. The same factory that Rowan and Alma and Taya and Daniel work at, but this time in a communist country. And remember, the government owns the factory. So under communism, the theory is everybody gets the same pay, no matter what. So if I were to take this and divide it equally into 4 parts, which of course it didn't divide exactly, Daniel would get this much, Taya would get this much, Alma would get this much, and Rowan would get this much, okay? Everybody would get the same amount of pay as everybody else, depending on how much the government decided to produce and for how much it sold those things. So under communism, you can see everybody gets the same pay. Even if Rowan is a manager, he gets the same pay, in theory. Well, let's think about that. Okay, so Rowan, let's say he works his butt off because he's a manager, and he works 10 more hours than Taya ever does. Alma, She has kids, so she takes more sick days because she needs to be with her kids. But she's still going to earn the same amount as Daniel, who comes every single day to work. Okay? So that's where things get a theoretically kind of interesting is Rowan's kind of like, dude, I'm making the exact same as Taya and Alma, but Alma doesn't come to work all the time. So that's where the problem starts to happen is we get within communism, and this is what will happen in the USSR, is what we get within communism is that the company's making this much money in profits, okay, for the government, remember, because the government owns it. But the idea that Rowan's like, I work and Alma doesn't. So then Rowan, because he's in charge, he splits this in half equally. But when he looks at Alma's pay, because he's a manager, he still has a little bit more for himself. So now he's got a bigger piece. Okay, and that's what started to happen with communism, is it became a corrupt system. Because everybody making the exact same amount creates a resentment, creates a lack of ingenuity. Why in the world would Taya think about trying to advertise or make something new? If this company produces markers, okay, the company that they work for, Rowan, Alma, Taya, and Daniel, produces markers. And Taya says, hey, I have a great idea. Why don't we add 2 more colors to this marker by making another side? And so you have all 4 colors. Well, why would Taya come up with such an idea? She's going to make the same amount of money no matter what. Whereas in capitalism, if she came up with that idea, she could be making a ton of money because she could patent her idea and sell it. So this is why communism and capitalism go head to head. They're very different. And if the government is only producing this much eventually, let's say they don't see it as necessary to produce a ton of these, okay? Then now Taya, Rowan, Daniel, and Alma now have to split a smaller profit, okay? Equal, but a lot smaller. If the government decides that's not a product we want to produce because it's the government's decision. And then if Rowan is taking a little bit off the top and sneaking it for himself, check out how the equal portion that Daniel and Taya and Alma get. And this is what would eventually happen over 40 years of communism in the USSR, is people would start living in poverty. They were equally living in poverty, but they were living in poverty. And so the Cold War is a lot about this ideology of capitalism versus communism, US versus USSR, the free world versus the iron curtain of everything being owned by the government. And that's the tension. And the idea is the USA doesn't want to see more countries fall to communism and possibly threaten capitalism. And the USSR doesn't want to see more countries fall to capitalism and threaten communism. So 2 ways of life are kind of being thought about in this Cold War. So, guys, our second code word for today is going to be third hour. So far, you've had 1 code word, and the second one is the number 11. And 6th hour, your second code word is hills, Hills. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. And then for those of you that haven't noticed already, I've been choosing code words off of some of the Netflix shows that I've been watching. Last week's Netflix show that I had watched is Narcos. I've been watching a lot of Narcos, and so Pablo 87 was when Pablo Escobar was in Colombia and at his height of his cocaine regime. And Pena was the DEA agent, the Drug Enforcement Administration agent, that ended up arresting Pablo Escobar in 1993. So those were your codes. This week, you have some codes here And it also goes along with the show on Netflix that I've been watching. So, in addition to writing your 2 code words down into your document for your class, if you can guess the Netflix show, I'll give you an additional 5 points of extra credit. All right, guys, that's it. So make sure you write your code words into let me jump into here. If you go into the Friday envelope here, you'll see my lecture where you've tapped into my lecture. And then you'll see where you can put your doc of the code words. And 5 points of extra credit if you guess the Netflix show that I've been watching. All right, guys, we'll see you later. Have a wonderful weekend. And yeah, bye.